Thank you for coming back to the second part of our discussions. And again, we will now have a run to 5 speakers' impulse ideas of what should we look after, what do we need to know, how can we improve the science path into policy. And then we will have a round where we look at the recommendations that we have collected, and we still see and have a discussion on, are they good enough? Have we overlooked things? So that will be next. But first, I will now start with Jose Queiroz. He should be here. There he is. Yeah, and you remember him maybe from this morning, from as president of APEX. Presenting, and now he's here and gets an extra minute because he's doing also deep sea research, and because I'm a deep sea researcher, he gets an extra minute.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. So you'll hear some of the things I already told in the morning, but I just know I need to do it in the morning 2 days ago, so this was already prepared. But I'm here to talk a little bit about how early career scientists in APEX can contribute to this research in this changing world, and I'll give you the example of Southern Ocean food webs. So for those who don't know, APEX is the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, and we are distributed in more than 80 countries in the world with approximately 5,000 members. But APEX is not just about networking and all. We do science and we work on climate change. You listened this morning also that we are part of the review of the IPCC special report for ocean and cryosphere in the climate change, in the changing climate, but we're also part of the new IR6, also as a group review in APEX. Besides this, APEX was formally accepted now as a delegation to COP28, and from 28 to 29 and so on. And we recently established a collaboration with PLOS Climate where we'll release a special collection. This special collection will contain reviews and opinion pieces led by early career scientists, and we are expecting around 70 papers involving more than 80 early career scientists. In terms of what brings us here today to this room, in terms of CI, ocean life and atmosphere, we have at least 4 papers that will highlight the food web in the Southern Ocean, biodiversity and preservation of microbiomes, using of satellites to study wildlife, and how predator-prey interactions occur in terms of avian polar animals. But as promised, let's try to focus on the food web. I'll just present you here one of the works publishing this that will be submitted this weekend, actually, where it's me with 7 other colleagues from all around the world, where we wanted to review what is known about Southern Ocean food webs, what are the future, and where early career scientists can be part of. So as a resume, we all know this yellow pathway. It's the classical food web from the Southern Ocean, phytoplankton, krill, and top predators. But the truth is recent studies have shown that we have plenty of pathways that you can see as red dots, using other crustaceans, microphids, squids, as major connectors between the phytoplankton and the top predators. And the way these are structured will be fundamental to understand how communities will respond to climate change. And the fact is that changes on these structures will imply changes in the carbon and nutrient cycles, but also will probably increase the bioavailability and concentrations of contaminants that are reaching the Southern Ocean. But despite all this, there are several threats to Southern Ocean food webs, and we already know about them. We have, for example, invasive species entering the Southern Ocean, which will lead to novel interaction, changes in phytoplankton communities and productivity, which probably will change, for example, the food chain length. Again, longer food webs with smaller phytoplankton are less stable, which is worse for animals. We have sea ice melting, large icebergs, which scour the benthic communities, leading that we need to start again the communities. We have extreme weather events, and we have, unfortunately, very recently, new diseases like the avian flu also reaching Antarctica, and this is also a threat to these food webs. And despite we know all this, the fact is we don't know a lot. We still don't know nothing about benthic, or very little about deep sea and benthic-dominated food webs. We have a couple of studies studying the diet, for example, of toothfish, which are fish there, so it's interest for a human perspective, but rather than that, benthic-dominated food webs are still poorly understood. We know nothing about how food webs are structured under the ice shelves. We know nothing about winter food web. And strangely, we still don't know a lot about how environmental conditions influence the structure of this food web. And how to solve this? Well, we need first and foremost to develop new technologies, because we can just go swim under the ice and just see who is eating who. So we need something to sample under the ice. We need to sample the deep sea. And highly important, we need data to be shared in large data sets, such as the SCAR Southern Ocean Diet and Energetics database, where everyone can put. Anton over there is leading this project with other colleagues. So if we share there, everyone will have access and will be able to build better food webs instead of just looking for smaller parts of the deep sea food web. And we need time, again, because time is precious. And analyzing these large data sets, looking for long-term data, requires a lot of time. And it's here where ECS can have a role. Again, interdisciplinary collaboration understanding, someone already spoke this morning about collaboration, it's needed. For designing a good food web, we need to look for different techniques. ECS love different techniques. They are more prone to develop and test new technologies. They are more diverse. Again, diversity brings better science, as shown in this work. And ECFs have time. They don't need to coordinate groups. They don't need to coordinate institutes. Or they should have, because they don't. We don't know about our future. We lack support. We need to constantly search for funding every 2-3 years. We need to apply for grants. And this take out the time to look for large data sets. So we need this. We need funding for projects. We need long-term contracts. We need to enhance the participation of early career scientists. And this is my role as early career scientist. Please give us money. Okay? Thank you a lot. Thank you a lot. So just to sum up, what do we need for the future? We actually need to study the food webs on the deep sea. It's really important to understand them under the ice and during the winter. This is crucial to understand how things change during the entire year. We need new technology and data sharing. Please share your data. It's really important. If you study the diet of a crustacean in the Weddell Sea, it'll be really important to build another piece on the puzzle of the big food web. And we need to involve and support early career scientists. And thank you. Merci.
Thank you. Very good. So now we're going to spend some time about new technologies and the giant gap of knowledge in the Southern Ocean. And first I call up Jan Robert. And Jan is my so-called my twin in France. He's the director of IPEF. And I'm sorry that I didn't mention everyone's nationality and institution, but many of them, but especially José, have 4 to 5 affiliations, and then we would eat too much time. We're all international global polar researchers.
Thank you, Antje. Thank you, everyone. Well, I'm going to speak indeed about something that has been evoked already a lot this morning and in the beginning of the session by José, which is international collaboration, innovation, technology, and how all this will drive our future projects. But let's go first on looking at the past and some example of polar collaborative project, or if you want, how scientific collaboration has brought some very holistic pictures about the pole. And I have 2 examples here I want to show. Yes, it works. One from the Arctic. The project is called Arctox. I don't know if the carrier, the PI of the project is in the room. He's probably. Which shows on the top globe showing the Arctic Circle, all the sampling points, all the sampling nations basically that are collaborating on this project, which aims at sampling blood from birds and gets all the contaminants that are in this blood. And you can see, like this, we can draw maps of contaminants like mercury in the blood of seabirds and have a better understanding on how these pollutants spread across the Arctic Circle. Another example from the south, as I've been told to try to be bipolar in the good way, the Census of Antarctic Marine Life, which has been a collaborative effort in the early 2000s and 2010s. where basically all the operators put their assets together to do samplings, or I would say classical samplings like continuous plankton recorders, Rosettas to collect microorganisms, scientific physical measurement also. To use the routes that we are always using when we go from the continents to our stations, to get a kind of one view at one stage of what the ocean, I would say, houses in terms of biodiversity. And the product that came out of this is a 3 kilos book with more than 9,000 species mapped, the Biogeographic Atlas of the Southern Ocean. And again, I'm going to mention a lot the Scientific Committee for Antarctic Research, because most of the projects I'm talking about, for the Antarctic at least, are driven by this organization. But doing this kind of work, like having all the boats going on the same time at the same oceans and doing the same kind of measurement, is very timely, costly, and so we have other alternatives, and José mentioned some of them. Here I would like to talk about one that is my own work, because that's always the work you speak the best of, which is basically biologging, or how you use animal embarked technology to monitor not only their biology, not only their activity at sea, but also parameters from the environment that you cannot access otherwise. And so this kind of device can give you, for instance, here you can see the track of an animal, so that's the path that you're following at the surface, and you can see each diving activity. Each line going down is a dive by the animal. During that time, he's sampling the whole water column for different parameters. In the past, we were sampling mainly things like temperature, salinity, which were the easiest, basically, to mount on miniature technologies. You have to know that nowadays we can sample dissolved oxygen, we can measure bioacoustics, we can measure a lot of different parameters. So we start to kind of have these animals as bioplatform or oceanographic samplers. And when you do this not only on one species in your own field of work, which was the Adelie penguin for me, and you start to work collectively, so with the SCAR, for instance, here you have an example of the retrospective analysis of Antarctic tracking data from the SCAR expert group on animal, seabirds and marine mammals, and the SCAR on EGABI. Anton, help me. What was EGABI? Thank you. That was the other one. So this kind of group putting their efforts together allow you to have a complete picture of all the tracking by the animals, and thus all the data that you can derive from them. Here, it's more like a conservation example. When we put all these species together and look where they are going, and not only where each species is going, but where species collectively go together, you start to have a map where you can say, okay, the zone in yellow are the zone where most of the species are going. So it's a zone which is not only rich in prey, in a number of prey, but rich in a wide variety of prey, because each of these predators have different needs. And so you can start to overlap this with important bird areas, or also marine protected areas. And then you can feed up the conservation policy with very accurate and dense data sets. But we talked about that. There is also a need for smart environmental monitoring, because the world under the sea ice, I think you got the message, whether you're talking about physics, whether you're talking about chemistry or biology, the world under the sea ice remains a big mystery for all of us. And for many places, it is the place where important food web are developing, and where I would say the resources are for not only, of course, the animals, but also for the humans maybe in the future. So we have to understand the stocks, we have to understand how to manage them, we have to understand how to conserve them. And for this, we need to do innovative technologies to go and sample under the sea ice. So there are several approaches, and the best is when you start to use all the approaches together. This is actually taken from a project of a researcher that should be in the room. Wave, Sarah, if you're here. Oh, Sarah is not here. Shit, I was hoping she was going to help me. But anyway, I'm going to do without it. Moorings, biologging, ROV, remote sensing, all this technology combined together can give you a clear picture of what's going on under the sea ice, where boats cannot go easily, or where maybe Tara Station, I could put a little Tara Station in the middle also, or several Tara stations, we'll see. Okay, and I'm just going to finish with actually where all these kind of reflections can take us, and two projects that are I would say under development, still in discussion, so it's not something which is finished, but something that maybe some of you could contribute. One is in the Arctic. It's the major Arctic science mission that's going to be discussed this week among countries, and which is basically a bit like the Census of Antarctic Marine Life, trying to get some in view of the Canadian Arctic and the Greenland seas, deploying boats all together and getting data together. And the other one that has already been mentioned by Antje a bit before is the International Science and Infrastructure for Synchronous Observation, which is better to read as InSync, which is going to put all the operators again to try to work together and to share assets, infrastructure, and science to get a clear picture of what is happening in the Antarctic and how it is changing. And I hope I've been able to fit the 5 minutes.
Very good.
Thanks.
A bit longer, but yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you. So, very good. We will finish up, and then you'll get the hard questions, of course. I would now ask Céline Le Beauhec, and we'll take another moment in time to think about the life and its connection to sea ice and ocean. And one of the most asked questions, or the question that so many media and people respond to, is the notion A, what Julien showed, the giant loss of Antarctica that was unpredicted and is not clear where it's coming from, and B, the work of a team of scientists that showed that a huge failure of breeding in penguins is there. And so we asked Céline especially to help us understanding what is going on.
Thank you. Probably my talk will be a little bit large, broad, according to what I heard this morning and just now. But let's go. If the presentation is going on now. Yes. No? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So, yeah, broad. I'd like to stress two fundamental points. So the first is that aim of science is not to convince. Our aim as scientists is to understand the world we are living in. And yet, a result from science can and should be used to make a decision as best as possible. So this is the first point. If it's possible to pass. The second one? Yes, okay. No, that's fine, that's fine. Okay, and the second fundamental point is that when it comes to climate and biodiversity crisis, science already provided a wide range of results for decisions to be taken now. Since the Meadows report and through diverse committees like IPCC, IPS, or SCAR for polar regions, we have the result, we have the solution actually to make actions, to make decisions, and to avoid disaster to our society. So really broad. We all know that the main problem is our carbon addiction and emissions. We all know that fossil fuel extraction projects are still going on and increasing, and they are threatening the Paris Agreement targets and threatening also the living condition on Earth. So this being said, the poles are fire alarms of our planet. We need to keep an eye on them. We need to monitor them to see if we are on the right track to make the planet livable again, or livable for the next generation of humans. But of course, monitoring these harsh and remote polar regions is challenging. But however, thanks to their position at the end of the food web, top predators like polar seabirds, and actually Jan discussed about it just a bit before, naturally integrate and amplify the consequences of environmental changes on lower trophic levels. And most polar seabirds actually are really linked to sea ice. Some of them are even called sea ice lover because they are breeding on sea ice and their food is belonging to sea ice, is based on sea ice. And if we take the case of this charismatic but near-threatened emperor penguins, actually they are prospecting a large volume of the Southern Ocean in depth and surface, and making them, as you can see actually on this map, I don't see it, I'm too small, but and making them actually really, really precious and perfect tools for designing marine protected area, not only for protecting them, but also to protect the biodiversity of their habitat at sea and obviously to protect our food resources. And as most seabirds, the emperor penguin is highly vulnerable to global warming. The last result, published something like 2 months ago by the British Antarctic Survey, show and confirm again the vulnerability of the emperor penguin and of the risk of extinction of the species by the end of the century. And actually, the scenario are more or less the same for the other penguin species if the target, the Paris Agreement target, are not met soon. So there is urgency, actually. And even if despite this urgency, there is still much to be discovered about these sentinels that can help us actually to assessing Antarctic marine ecosystem services as well as decision making. But we lack long-term monitoring and time series, both in geoscience and biology. And actually, this lack and to fill this gap has been identified by SCAR as a priority. And to fill this gap, we need urgently to expand and reinforce network of cross-disciplinary long-term polar observatory. So here I put you an example of a polar life observatory with combining autonomous long-term in-situ monitoring with autonomous camera observatories and rovers that we combine with satellite-based remote sensing, so biologgers like Jan just presented, but also using some very high resolution satellite imaging. And the idea is also to combine and synchronize those observatories with ship-based measurement. And by continuously assessing sea ice dependent population trend and health like penguins, a network of those polar observatory can provide near real-time assessment for polar ecosystem health as well as dynamic tools for ecosystem management like marine protected area. So to me, the way to go should be first, to define a clear and concrete government and international roadmap, to end our dependence on fossil fuel within the next few years, as recommended by the IPCC. And at the same time, to establish priority for actions at all scale, including science, so including research objective and priority. And in terms of priority, we all know that polar regions are one of the most important piece of the puzzle. So that's why it is capital to increase our knowledge on sea ice and ocean atmosphere biodiversity interaction of these polar regions. And this, obviously, as Jan or José just told you, it requires more resources and international cooperation. So here is my main message.
Thank you. Thank you, Celine. And now for the last two Impulse talks, we will discuss even the other human impacts we have to speak about, pollution that comes from short distance and long distance, and activities in the polar regions. And we start with Apple. She's here and she gets the prize for the longest travel to Paris, I think, from Thailand. Thank you, Apple, for coming here and putting your viewpoint on marine debris and microplastics.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. So actually, in the past several years, Thailand has an opportunities to join research expeditions in both Arctic and Antarctic. With the support from the EFOP member state like China, Japan, Korea, or Norway. But many people probably curious, right? Why Thailand, a non-polar country, nation, is interested in going to polar regions. And actually, originally, with the support from Her Royal Highness Princess of Thailand, we mainly focus on the research. But later, we realized that the polar now, as we all know, that they have suffer from pollution created by human activities that not just only within the polar area, but also from the outside. And that is very important for us to do something. And like a picture that I just showed you here, over last expeditions to Arctic, we went to the northernmost of the islands. And what we found is that many kind of leader lie along the shorelines. And where those leaders come from, because no one lived there. And we also had an opportunity to went diving there on the North Pole. And when we went there, well, it looked like a subtropical because we saw different species of jellyfish now, and also, well, varieties of algae happenings. And not only that, when we look at microplastic, we found quite a high accumulations of microplastic in different kind of different species of benthic species. And not only that, well, from our long-term surveys in Antarctica, we found a trend of increase in a different species of ectoparasites on Antarctic fish in the past 15 years. So some of them can be a small size, some of them can be a larger size, and this actually shows us that there is a link between global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, human activities, and changing of the biodiversity and new emerging disease in the polar regions. And not only that, well, as some of you know, that polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are among the most abundant anthropogenic pollutants in the Antarctic environments. And these pollutants level in the inland Antarctica can reach hundreds of nanograms per liter, which is quite high. And this high level of pollutant in Antarctica can come from a combination of human activities from burning the oils and gas, and also the climate change. So not many people, particular people who live in a tropical area like Thailand, would know that their activities, such as releasing the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere or dumping the trash into the ocean, those pollution can end up into the North and South Pole and Arctic regions. And also not many people from the tropical area that know that their activities can link to the changes of behavior of animal in the polar regions. Like this picture, we found that, well, right now, the polar bear, they can eat moss and grass and became herbivore rather than the carnivore. So now our purpose is not just only doing a research in Arctic or Antarctic, but we also need to raise awareness on the importance of the polar regions and how human activities around the world, including the tropical area, can link to the changes of the ocean in the polar area. And it is time to send a message out to those people who live outside of the polar area and out of the glacier area to know that their activities can have tremendous effects to the polar regions. We need to have more sustainable and long-term strategies for international ambitions in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and removing them urgently before it is too late. We also need to have more international collaborations between polar and non-polar nations to work on the research together and have mitigation strategies together to monitor and reduce those pollution in polar area. We all need to care no matter where we live because the earth is on the overhand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, while you get ready for discussing messages, the last of our speaker round is Jackie Dawson, Director of Science Director of ArcticNet. And thank you, Jackie, for bringing us even closer to the cryosphere.
Okay, well, we're taking a slight turn. We're going to talk a little bit about implications and, what do the changes in sea ice ocean that we're seeing, what is that going to lead to? So it's hard to cover everything. So I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to focus on the things that I know best. So talk a little bit about economic development and what these changes are going to do. And there is a line that is in the SPM of the Working Group 2 IPCC, which I admit I wrote, that says there is not a single economic sector that will not be impacted by climate change, not a single one. And we did the work to make sure that that was a legitimate claim. And these burning embers, how many of you know the burning embers? I'm guessing most people here would. Most of the time, it takes me like 2 weeks to explain these things to my students. So of the 8 or 10 burning embers that we produced for the Working Group 2 report, 4 of them are focused on the ocean or sea ice, which basically what that says is these are extremely high risk areas when it comes to impacts and adaptation, so impacts to the economy, to health, to what have you. There's going to be winners and there's going to be losers in terms of the economy. There are some fisheries that may become more productive in the Arctic regions and potentially in the Antarctic as well. Local harvesters in the local subsistence economy, that might take a hit. Local food security is one of the major issues of sea ice change. And tourism. So many people don't think about tourism. As scientists, we don't think about it as much. But there is this huge boom in tourism going on, and there's this idea of last chance tourism where people are actually going to see polar bears in Churchill or on cruises in the Antarctic to see penguins before they're dead. This is the rhetoric that you read in the news, and there is research on this, and that people are following this, this trend. So these are some of the things that are going on. This is my favorite topic, which is shipping, maritime trade, transportation. What's going to happen when the ice is gone? And this morning we heard Julian Struve. I loved her one figure that talked about what we're going to see in terms of accessibility at 2, 3, 4 degrees warming. I think she said at 4 degrees warming we might see 9 months of open water. That message is extremely important, but it doesn't always translate into economic opportunities unless we actually put the work in, because it actually is going to lead to more risks. Because before we have that open water, we have more hazardous water. So, for example, in the Northwest Passage, which I know best, a lot of that sea ice is breaking up, and it's coming, and it's choking up the Northwest Passage. So actually, and I'm going to show you a map in a minute that explains that. But it's actually becoming less accessible for ships in the Northwest Passage than it was before. But other regions are becoming more accessible. So ship traffic is increasing exponentially, and we've done the work. We've statistically correlated sea ice reduction with shipping increases, but not for all vessel types. We see that statistical correlation when you look at non-commercial vessels, so yachts, cruise ships. The ice goes, the people want to come. That's what we see. The larger vessels that are doing trade and transport, those are not really related to climate change, although climate change is going to create opportunities for international trade through the Arctic. And I think there are a lot of people that say we're not going to see it in the next well, we probably won't see it in the next 10 years, but I think we are going to see it in the next 20 to 30 for lots of reasons. One, droughts are creating issues for the Suez and Panama canals. There's a ton of economic interest in having shorter routes through the Arctic. There's major innovations in ship design. So I do think that we're going to see trade, maritime global trade through the Arctic at some point. When we look at projections, again, what I think is really interesting is the Northern Sea Route's going to increase. It's already fairly accessible from a CA's perspective. It's going to increase, we think, by about 30% by 3 degrees warming. The transpolar route, so that route that everyone loves right over the top here, that could increase by about 56%. So that's the money route that everybody wants. By 4 degrees, we think about 56%. And the Northwest Passage, we actually think is more like 10 to 20%. So that's the less viable route for sure. And I'll come back to that in a second. One thing that I find really interesting that's related to the previous speaker, and this has been one of my recent obsessions, is that when you have less ice, you have more ships, but those ships bring more risks. So they bring potential for invasive species introduction through hull fouling, ballast water exchange. You've got underwater noise impacts on marine mammals. So the point I want to make here is we need these systems-based risk assessments, and they need to include not just the direct impacts of climate change, but those indirect impacts too. So the ships are coming. What are the impacts of those ships that are coming? And so one thing we're also seeing is we're seeing these petroleum-based microplastics. So paint, which we weren't expecting. We're seeing tons of hull paint in the Canadian Arctic from ice-breaking vessels. These hull paints are full of anti-fouling chemicals that we use to prevent the introduction of invasive species. So we need to think about trade-offs and policies. And we need to think about what we're saying in our scientific articles. If we're saying, if we're making the right statements, we got to consider the whole picture, not just one piece of that puzzle. Yes, we want anti-fouling chemicals. We don't want invasive species, but then do we want these petroleum-based microplastics accumulating up the food chain as they ablade off the vessels, which that's how they're designed. We design paint to come off on purpose. So it's something we need to start thinking about. So we've been putting students on ships and taking samples all throughout the last few summers. This is what I was talking about earlier. So on, I think, the left-hand side, this is the Northwest Passage, and we were looking at viability and season length. So you have to take CA's charts and kind of the work that Julian and others do and convert them into these sort of navigation maps, and those are based on an equation that's been developed, and it matters what type of vessel is going through. It matters the level of ice strengthening, et cetera. So what we do is we put all of this together and we try to understand what is the actual season length, what is the actual viability of ships through these regions, and then we can use that to project future projections as well. But what we found, and I won't go into detail here, but this is a paper about to be submitted. There are certain parts of the Northwest Passage that are going to be completely accessible, and very much in line with those projections that Julian presented. But there are certain points in the Northwest Passage that are absolutely going to be choked full of ice. And so what we've done is kind of identify exactly where those are going to be. And in fact, they correlate with some of the most recent search and rescue events. So basically, the Northwest Passage isn't, super safe. This is my last point. So the last point I want to make is that when we're doing modeling and we're trying to understand change, we have to make it accessible to the people that we want to take up this information. So this figure on the right is about resupply vessels to the Canadian Arctic communities. And it's about which communities and which ship routes are going to be more or less accessible in the future. So we've basically taken the models, downscaled them to a very, very regional scale, and just put the community name on it so that they can make decisions about, what kind of food policies they want to make to try to make food less expensive. And it's same thing here. annual number of good ice trail days. That is not scientific language, but that is the language that we need to translate our work into. And a good sea ice trail day is based on indigenous knowledge, how thick the ice is. Are they carrying seals on a Kamatek? All of these sort of things. So it's just converting our model outputs to language that matters for indigenous people. And there's tons of other things I can talk about, but I won't, Angie. These are my final points, just in summary. The sea ice and ocean systems are experiencing some of the highest rates of socioeconomic risk. The implications are across every single economic sector. We need risk assessments. We especially need loss and damage, because politicians love numbers when it comes to this sort of thing. And I'm too short too, so I'm just gonna have to stand up. We absolutely need international, interdisciplinary efforts, and Jan, thanks for mentioning the MASM. Indigenous knowledge is absolutely essential in everything we do. I don't think we've talked enough about Indigenous people in this meeting. That's okay, this is a science meeting, but Indigenous people have an enormous amount of information that we can use. And how we do research matters as much as what we do. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll have a half hour now, and we have to stick to the time because we then have to run back and present outcomes. And I suggest first, if there are urgent questions to the science that was presented, to the topics, that would be the time now. And I have to make a big excuse to the online community. In this room, it was streamed and no chat function. So there are excellent people online who would have probably had a lot of input and their mouth remains shut. So very sorry, you guys. Hello, Dirk. And I have more than one Dirk. So, are there any direct questions to the science we should address at this point? Otherwise, we would go and run you through recommendations that we have collected from everyone. I don't see an urgent. But thanks again to all the speakers to show these quite sad news in some ways about how large life seabirds respond, and that there's more than one problem, even though the whole question of chemistry, persistent chemistry, and plastics is a part of petrochemistry and is a part of questions of fossil fuel. There are still separate problems, and it's good that we raised them, and it's good that we also had some fundamental input to biodiversity as the coupled parallel crisis that needs other solutions in parts than climate. So I would like to take a moment to summarize to you what will happen now with the written comments that we take out from this session and all three sessions that are happening in parallel. There is an overarching little description to the politics that will be handed over first tomorrow to the ministers who are coming. There are a lot of environmental and research ministers coming. And the three science breakout groups have written an introductory paragraph and overarching calls. And we put the entire framework of what science says and recommends under the notion of international stewardship. And for those of you who have never heard about this naming of the role of good governance and politics, let me just spend a moment explaining what is meant by international stewardship. It is coming also from traditional and indigenous knowledge that there are, and it's actually one of the oldest human traditions to think long-term, not only next election period. And for all of the big investments in the future, when we talk beyond 2100, when we talk multi-generation chances, we have to revert to that old human tradition of thinking long-term. And especially, for example, in the Polynesian people, but also in Inuit cultures, there is this long-term thinking, and they have their own stewards for that. They have various names in various cultures, but there is a recommendation. I've read that and I've discussed this with Polynesian people. Just think, parallel governance. You have, of course, democratic politics. We need all of that, elections, but everything needs to be in place. We need to be fast, participatory, and all of that. But there needs to be stewards that are allowed to think and act on much longer timescales, internationally, globally, for all humanity as one. And that is not satisfactorily organized right now, as everyone agrees. That's why we say science calls for international stewardship. So that means thinking long-term, investing long-term into solutions. That's the one thing. And we will now go directly, I think, to not so much the overarching call, but to a few of the elements. See, it's all a lot of text, so we broke it down for you. There is a set that we want to produce on policy recommendations and a set of science action points. The policy recommendations, most of you know. So I'll do that very quickly, that we have time to discuss on the science action points. They are directly relevant also for the politicians and the science ministers that are here. It's clear, and everyone has mentioned that greenhouse gas emissions are the cause, and we thus are the cause, and that means we have to get rid of our fossil fuel dependency. That has been said many, many times, and the one word that science currently has to say over and over again is that it is not so that after we overshoot 1.5, the world comes to an end. There is a very long-term engagement in keeping a balance, with striking a balance with climate neutrality, as we call it. And we tried to make it very clear, because so many people are so frustrated and so many youth has climate depressions, because there is a miscommunication at times that we will all be dead when we reach a certain temperature limit. And the public doesn't even discern between, do we reach it for a month or for 100 years? So our language is again problematic here. And we would like to say that we call for clear actions, but we do acknowledge that the commitment that is already in the atmosphere and the path on which we're on will most likely get us in this century much beyond that. And we're clear with that. Okay? We also say that the treaties that we have, the policy treaties on all levels, these are just two examples, but we have conferences of the parties. We have a decision of humanity to reach certain goals. They're in place, and we just say international collaboration to act on them, to not block them because people are fighting, is essential to reach the goals. So that is, I think, also obvious to everyone. But it's good that science insists on treaties and on political action. And many of you have commented on that. Cryosphere literacy, we say it again and again, it's not easy following our words. We say stuff that makes no sense to a lot of people. And that we call literacy, that we are better, ourselves, we are better in voicing information, but everyone else to pick up information, and we can do a great job. Think back 100 years when there were no weather apps, and when was so decisive for a farmer to know what the weather will be in a few days and what they use, and we have to achieve that for the cryosphere in many ways. So this is hopefully for you also clear that there is this overarching goal, and it goes much beyond a fringe environment. It's actually key to the habitability of our planet, human security, and all of the things that, for example, Jackie mentioned or many of you mentioned. We all agree that there is a key solution to the biodiversity crisis, and this is protect, protect, protect. Give room, give space to life, give space where some pressures that cannot be avoided are not so effective because other pressures are removed. Again, I hope there needs to be not a debate on this. What is probably important for you to see that we are clear that the science calls for a type of protection in polar and marine environments that still supports the self-determination among indigenous communities. The majority of the scientists that talk are not for fencing nature, they are for participatory protection of those who know better anyways. And that's here hidden in this message, that we want to be clear that there are ways of protecting that essentially use indigenous knowledge. Jackie again has mentioned this, and you all know about this. Socioeconomic decision-making tools are really important to include the cryosphere. The whole procedure of the COP of planning and calculating loss and damage funds for the risks that cannot be changed do not include at this point the polar regions or the high mountain regions, and that is a must. And the infrastructure to enhance resilience to climate change, this is key for those areas, again, mountains, but also the northern regions, but also all regions that feel a consequence of glacial melt. To enhance their resilience is again a must, and that needs a perspective of the cryosphere. So these are basically the broader overarching goals that we put together, and I think we've tagged them all during this session, and many of them also came from the Scientific Advisory Board in the beginning, who said, like, don't forget about these, discuss them and have a clear scientific voice. Does anyone feel a major gap? I know that we can fight forever about wording. There is IPCC wording, there is IPBES wording, there is all kinds of wording, and unfortunately we don't have the time to decide on one language in this, but does anyone feel for the overarching goals, before we get to the scientific priorities, that from the perspective of humanity and the science there is a really big missing point? Yes, please?
Overshoot needs to be as little as possible, and the emissions need to come down, because otherwise it just makes everything much more difficult. So that's really important for you.
That's a good point. There will be a special session that will at least give us the chance to debate. It's one of the most brutal points that we all know. Without carbon dioxide removal, a lot of the cryosphere components and all life connected to it is partially really doomed. So there will be a session that will talk about what visions are there. I can tell you there was a huge study in Germany. Basically, the technical solutions that are at hand are actually not understood and so expensive that they will probably just make the force on regenerative energies bigger, but not really help that much at this point. But it is a good debate. We'll have that, and it will be definitely voiced from the meeting here, not only from the scientific breakout sessions. Yeah. But we also don't want to be just handing over doom to the politicians. It's not good enough. We would just say we will overshoot 1.5 and that's the end of everything. It doesn't help the debate with politicians, as you all know. Huh? Okay. So if you have seen those overarching goals, then we will go to scientific priorities and also try to check that we'll have the majority of all of your comments included. And we have chosen this beautiful photograph. Jackie sent it over because the science has changed, and a lot of the science we're involved in sees humanity as one people and looks at the priority of science for everyone, and that would be the stand we would like to take. So we would like to take scientific priorities as inclusive to people as possible. Want to go? Ah, that's me. Okay, do you want to discuss this one, Marcel?
Okay, so the first priority is to strongly reinforce cooperation among space agencies to consistently distribute Earth observation data for polar regions, develop new missions, new products and algorithms, and conduct dedicated field expeditions for ground truthing. So I don't know if some people have comments, maybe the experts like Julian. Where's Julian? So the idea here is to first maximize the use of everything that is made available by the different space agencies and make sure that all the data sets can be combined and standardized, and that may be true for some of the techniques that are used that are a little bit more tricky but are very promising, like for instance the synthetic aperture radar, which can be really tricky to interpret, and we have no standard processing of these. And while many other remote sensing data sources are very well are standard and very well distributed, There are some of them are not as of today. One other challenge is to make sure that there's continuity in the products also, that there's no gaps sometime in missions, and that we do not end up with 2-3 years without sea ice concentration data, for instance, from passive microwaves.
There's a comment up there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if people here introduced themselves, but I'm Johanna Ikavalko, Director of the Arctic Center, University of Lapland. I'm interested whether this actually includes also the high elliptical orbit mission, because without that, we won't be able to be seeing the highest parts of the Arctic. That would be very important to include. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you take notes, Marcel?
Yeah, I will take that. Yeah.
Right.
So any other comments on remote sensing? I mean, we show a lot of remote sensing data. Obviously, I mean, this is one of the greatest source of data, and without going to the poles, and continuous data or multi-year data. So they are extremely powerful, and the space agencies should even increase the effort to develop new products and also validate them in the field, to support expeditions, in situ expeditions, to validate the products, to get more from the data we collect. For instance, on snow cover thickness on sea ice, which is another pretty tricky product, but which is terribly useful. So. Any more comments on that?
We cannot list everything, but there's a huge innovation need, but it is also happening, especially as you said, all water cycle questions. That is important, but also in biodiversity, there are immense innovations in how to actually understand, monitor the visible part of biodiversity, and for the under ice, we will come to more recommendations in a moment. Okay, next one then.
Yeah, I can start. So support long-term international sea ice, ocean, biosphere, and atmosphere programs by infrastructure, as well as by large international missions nested into and coordinated with international observing networks and initiative. I think the second part is really important. It's really important to connect specific short-term major actions such as MOSAIC, for instance, in which there has been major efforts to coordinate people among disciplines internationally for a 1.5 year or 1 year expedition. And I think it's really important to develop more of these programs because they allow really going beyond the frontier of knowledge by bringing these different expertises on atmosphere, sea ice, ocean. But we have to make sure that to some extent these networking efforts get sustainable. Mm-hmm. So what do we do next with these networks, and how do we make these programs sustainable, long-term? Of course, not the same kind of massive effort, but long-term. So how do we connect all the long-term observing efforts with these very specific massive expeditions?
Mm-hmm. And for those of you who are part, there's a hand right going up. So the APEX, APEX members who have stood up so far, this point is very important, and it's coming in also from early career scientists, and maybe we can even add something like ensure global access as an extra point. The inclusivity is important here. This issue with long-term, that is, of course, as you say, very critical. And what I find, because we work on Arctic and Arctic, what I find amazing, so just because we have the Antarctic Treaty, just because we have the COMNUP, for example, like the meeting where all the infrastructure holders are, where they know each other. If you have an issue in Antarctica, it's much easier to get help, support, knowledge across, because there is a treaty, because there are these working groups that are long-term. And so we don't have a comparable thing yet in the Arctic, and I think that is one of the discussion points that I know will be happening. between politics, so how do we achieve that pan-Arctic as well as an Arctic? There is a new, at least one great new European program, Polarin, on sharing, opening, interconnecting research icebreakers and ships. That might help to these ideas where people work together and share and share and share and plan long term is to us very important as recommendation. You want to add?
Hi, this goes along with your point on inclusivity as well, in the Arctic especially. Maybe this is another opportunity to mention indigenous-led science and including indigenous people in science from the beginning, and that can improve the long-term nature of it, as well as the year-round, I think was brought up earlier, the need to have research in the winter. There are people that live there all year round. So, thank you.
Yeah, I think there is a recommendation in a moment that goes specifically for that notion, so we'll come back to that, please.
Sorry for being allowed again. Hopefully I'm saying something sensible. I was wondering if here are people from SEON, Sustainable Arctic Observation Network, because we or they all know that actually robust investments into network observing networks is certainly needed, and I'm talking here about sort of hard techniques and observing stations. Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely the robust investment or the long-term investments is a point we make again and again in the long text, so that is covered, that's clear. Okay, then we go to the next point. So here comes a part that has to do with some of the recommendations you gave, the regional cooperation, and especially around going beyond just investigating, just diagnosing, but to help marine protection networks or polar protection networks on land too. That is a specific action for science and science-based resources to develop in a resilient and sustainable manner exactly that we understand what protection even means. And you've heard examples from a number of people here that there are parts that we still have to discover, namely the excessive chemical inventories that we have to make from ever-changing petrochemicals in the environment. That is such a thing where it belongs to networks of observation and biodiversity protected areas that science provides capacities to monitor. That is key, I think, and we wanted to be very clear about this, that science has a role in protection. Again, we know it's a matter of funding, because it's really hard to engage in that. If you have an early career researcher and you want to discover, write great papers, and then people ask monitoring of you or new methods, Jose has mentioned that. But without a good science, the whole part about protection is weak, as we know from previous examples. So that point was coming up too, that biodiversity as climate is a key component of the future of our knowledge about cryosphere. It must also be clear. We've had good examples here. Regional cooperation, that leads again to this point that those that are in some places have a larger task than those that are very remote. And so to really work together hand in hand where you can, we wanted to be also strong about that. Don't see another hand. Okay, now comes a very critical part. That has been brought up by a number of people from the Science Advisory Board. You've heard a list this morning. And that is the problem that while we are doing the best science that we want to do, most of us are fossil. Like our beautiful Polarstern, it's a 42-year-old ship. And it's amazing when you are out in the white and you see this black trace from the ship. So we have an honest discussion what cruises are worthwhile doing and how soon can we end fossil research infrastructure without harming research. And I know it's everywhere in all research institutions. We have that debate. And that's why we wanted to especially make clear that science alone cannot fix that, because if we are to build a new ship, which Germany eventually will do, the costs are tremendous, and it is a government that has to decide on a ship running on renewables. And so the Antarctic stations have this discussion. Some are building wind parks, but that's not well experienced. Overwintering in Antarctica, trusting on a windmill is quite difficult. So you see where we're coming from, and the question is to you, do you have more input here? So we'll have the footprint reduction that we all would like to achieve for our polar infrastructure. Some ideas are better than others. So we've heard Chris mentioning Tara. Low footprint solutions can be done with a lot of instruments. In the polar regions, there's very little sunlight, so you can forget about having gliders and instruments operated by photovoltaics, as we can do in space. But all of that, including also CIS information products that help you knowing where to go and when and all of that, is a bow to sustainability also in our own science, that we just not point the fingers to everyone else, but also understand we have a task. Do you agree? Are there comments? Jan? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just, I will speak loud. Just a small comment to reiterate. Thank you. Much better. We will reiterate in the operator's session and operator's statement the same kind of points. So I think it's going to be heard, because at least they will have twice the message.
Okay, thank you. That's good. Good. Next one. So there we come back to the notion that you brought forward. The capacity building of those who can actually do year-round analyses is, of course, the capacity of local communities in all places. That is a big theme also, of course, in all 3 scientific breakout sessions, and a lot of people recommended maximize on what, I didn't know this expression before, north by north and south by south studies. It's interesting, it means that those people who are really living in places can carry, if we support and help them, a part of the research needs. That must be organized, and it's not organized in all places, but it is a good scientific mission to potentially adopt that you leave something behind and enable people, communities with whom you collaborate, to continue with the science, to make science more sustainable. That is meant by this expression here.
Yep. Maybe one success story of that kind is the Smart Ice program in Canada, where the Inuits use sensors to measure sea ice thickness and just map sea ice thickness all around their community. This is of direct use for them for security reasons. I mean, so it fulfills their own needs first, and then these data are just transferred to some networks and shared with the global community. So there are examples also where, so the idea here is not only that the local communities could support our activities, but they would develop their own activities that, I mean, we may get some benefit from or not, whatever. Yep.
Yep. Are there more comments on this one? Yeah, there's one.
I just wondered if you could unpack what you mean by south by south. I understand north by north. Thank you.
I have one answer. Do you have, so there are initiatives, of course, a lot of when you look at the map and you look the ones living around Antarctica, sometimes it's far away, sometimes it's almost tropical, but actually there is a lot of proximity to Antarctica. And there is a movement, and it is very strong in Argentina, in Chile, in Uruguay, but also in New Zealand and Australia, to remember also historical obligations with the larger environment around Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. And one amazing concept is going in the Maori tribes that are looking in their history, finding a relationship to the Southern Ocean, a really big one about human migration and about arts and culture. And so there is an idea and some discussion amongst Antarctic researchers, is there not a similar participation possible? And many of the Antarctica close by, more proximity regions do think about engaging more and bringing more actually to, and also Namibia I've forgotten, South Africa I've forgotten, so that goes all around. And that's why we also call it South by South. Roman?
Yes, thank you. Maybe for these objectives, include the funding part of it, not only develop capacity building. We are facing this today in the EU calls, in all these funding agencies. We need to pledge for money for this capacity building because it costs money, it costs formation, it costs to accept people in the labs to not only to use the tool but to interpret the data. That takes a lot of time, I think.
Yeah, that we can mention particularly there. You're absolutely right. That part often falls off the table. Okay, next one. Almost there. Do you want to run to that? What? Okay, I think we mentioned it already a little bit. So coming back to our task CIs, there is, and Jackie mentioned this, but also Julien, the CIs is, we often talk of it as being low or reduced or lost, but there's awkward things going on with CIs. For example, in the Arctic, the drift speed is increasing tremendously. There is an issue with interactions where CIs is and is not CIs, and that is discussed in the permafrost and georisk session. CIs can be missing and allowing waves and storms to take out coast, erosion, land. And so to think of CIs also as a protective barrier, for example, to think of CIs as a transportation mean, as a also sea ice that behaves in a certain predictable way for the habitability of the sea ice zones. We've heard from Oleg this morning what it matters to Inuit communities fishing on sea ice when it's not predictable anymore, shipping through sea ice. So there's a long list of sea ice uses and contexts that need clear, much better prediction tools, drift tools, and thinning sea ice is determined much more by wind and weather, and so there was a lot of input from sea ice specialists. Just not forget that we could have forecasting tools and we could be better at that. Yes, please.
I just want to mention, we talk a lot about monitoring and forecasting. I'm telling to my students that the past is not a prediction for the future anymore because we enter a new phase. And this is something we also kind of have to address because it's so easy to make predictions. But last year we showed that many of the results, what we monitored, were out of phase with what we predicted. And I think that will happen more, and it will be more difficult to predict. So we need to be also a little bit humble if we talk about predictions and that kind of thing, because I think it's increasingly difficult. Absolutely.
And there is well, I don't know yet if it is a solution, but also this morning we discussed this. The Scientific Advisory Board brought that in. We did not go specifically into this topic of forecasting and simulating and predicting, but there are big initiatives worldwide, including digital twins of ocean, climate, but also polar seas. That means that we use new and often black box methods of prediction and simulation, and we use everything we know. We use artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on to know and to predict. And the first tests that are out there are surprisingly good, especially also for weather prediction and climate prediction. There's already evidence that with much better data assimilation, we can be faster and clearer and have potentially also a better risk management. So that is meant to improve science, and I know especially for Europe there is a clear mission out there to do exactly that, to have a much better forecasting system of extremes and of risks to humans, and it's a new line of research, you can say, based on long-term driving of using mathematical models to know better about the future. So that we would like to include as well. Okay, and I think with that we have been running through our science recommendations. And now we can fill in gaps if you find something we've totally forgotten and should add. We did not show you, there is a lot of text that was written up and a long list of missions that should be mentioned in these missions of the future international collaboration. But we collect for the next few minutes before we run over some more input. And there is a lot of hands in the back.
Is it on? Yeah. Hi, I'm Rolf Fröner from the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program. My question kind of fell in between chairs, so I'll bring it up now. And I mean, we've been monitoring and assessing trends in contaminants and climate since 1991. And I would say the Arctic is a perfect canary bird for the globe, because all contaminants end up in the Arctic more or less and are brought up through the food webs. And likewise, we've heard several times the Arctic amplification strengthening climate change. One thing I'm not sure if it is expressed well enough here, and that's the consequence of what we've seen when it comes to science to policy making, is, for instance, Stockholm Convention managed to bring up the problems with persistent organic pollutants. But where it failed was the interactions between contaminants and climate and those interactive effects. And I'm not sure, maybe, well, my question is, have you expressed those interactions well in those statements? It might have come up under the monitoring to the need to kind of connect interdisciplinary research to kind of bring this up at the level where you have like a population level to actually make any sense for policy making. So thanks.
Yeah, good point. That's not strong enough. I also thought about this when you, Jackie, talked. We could be a bit stronger and include the risk of multiplying and exponential effects because of that. Thank you for that point. Yeah. 3 more, and then we have to come to an end, unfortunately.
Hi, Klaus Timon with Project Pressure. It was about the political recommendations. And going back to that, when I heard it, my heart started beating. Because what has happened with scenarios is that there's been worst case scenarios, and then we hit the worst case scenarios, and we're heading for even worse case scenarios. And if you tell a politician that we're overshooting 1.5, but that's not where we're heading. We're heading for a worst case scenario where we're overshooting 3, possibly heading towards 4. And the idea of sugarcoating something to politicians, they will take away with what they want to hear, the best case scenario, and maybe it's not so bad. And that's not where we're heading. And I think science has a history of being too conservative of what is actually happening because we work with uncertainties, et cetera, but I think it's quite certain that the direction of travel is a catastrophe. And I think that should be communicated clearly, because if not, we're doing ourselves a disfavor. Thank you.
Can I get the microphone? You're absolutely right. So the problem is that we cannot run to the entire long text, and there is a paragraph that says where we are and where we will be on the trajectory we are on with exactly those numbers. So there is a short paragraph where science reinforces again this overarching description of IPCC and everything what we know. And there we just reinforced once more, and this is what we showed. Just know that there is an overshoot problem, which doesn't mean it is too late to do something, right? That's the important point. But we are very clear, and we are voicing in the declaration, also the science part, the trajectory on is at the moment, the official IPCC is 2.7. The gap that we have is 2.7. So thank you for mentioning it again. But it's very clearly stated in the first paragraph that we didn't read out here because it concerns all 3. Thank you. There was, I think, one more up there, and then one more. And at 4:30 we have to stand in the other room. So I'm sorry that we have to end in a few minutes.
Yes, Anton van der Putten from the SCAR Antarctic Biodiversity Report. I think that's the easiest definition. Something that I saw on your first slide, completely at the bottom, was data, open data. I think it's crucial to highlight that. It is sharing our results with the world. It's making actually research in the poles accessible to everybody. If you look at the Ocean Decade, it's also mentioned as a key component. So I think it's something that you need to highlight, that open data and raw data, not just data product, is key in this context.
Thank you. Also in the overarching text that we all insist on fair data and on enabling the data sharing. That is a full paragraph. And then the last recommendation, and then we have to run. Apex gets the last word, but only one Apex.
Yeah, so I will take it. I'm just wondering, because we are thinking about long term, and I was surprised in the different recommendation that the word education is nowhere. So I was just wondering how it will be included, because we have the next generation in the center of the room here, so I was just wondering.
It's all hidden under cryosphere literacy, and I accept it as poor, but we're not allowed more than 2.5 pages, and so we can try to add education.
At least the word.
The word. And that is a fantastic last word for our session. Thank you to all speakers for educating us, and all the audience.